Hello everyone, this is Katarina. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I have for you another set of autumnal cards, and this time I will be showing you 3 ways of using a stencil. I will be using this stencil from Autumnal. It's called a Leaf Burst Stencil, and I will be using distress inks. I picked 4 autumnal colors. Then I will be using the texture paste from Ranger, and lastly I will be using the Nuvo Glimmer paste. There are plenty of other ways of using a stencil. I actually wanted to use the mousse from Nuvo, but I only have a pale green color, which is not really an autumnal color. So I will be sticking with 3 techniques and I will be creating thank you cards. So let's start. First technique is just a simple distress ink blending or just ink blending. There are other inks that blend well, but distress inks are all I have and they do blend very well. For all the cards I will be showing you today, I used a cardstock from Paper Mill Direct, which is a UK company. I also die cut all the panels using the stitched rectangular dies from Create a Smile. For this technique, you can die cut the panel after you do the ink blending, but for the next 2 techniques, this is not possible. So if you want to die cut your panel for the final project, make sure you die cut it first. I used a laminated cardstock as a board and I attached the panel on top of it using a non-permanent adhesive. I placed the stencil on top of it and I secured the stencil with a washi tape. The stencil really helps the blending to glide across the paper because it's really smooth. I don't think I was trying to be very careful with the pressure I was applying. Usually the trick is to try to start at the edge of the panel, working your way inwards. The colors of the inks I used for this project are Candied Apple for the red, Curved Pumpkin for the orange, Mowed Lawn for the green, and Mustard Seed for the yellow. The inks blend very nicely and create a fun, colorful background. For the technique number 2, I will be using distress inks again, but this time I will be combining them with a texture paste. If you have an embossing paste, you can use it as well. It's practically the same. I'm using a texture paste just because when I was shopping on Amazon, this was the only thing that was available. Again, I attached the panel onto a laminated cardstock. I wanted to use the white laminated cardstock to mix the paste and the distress inks. So I took a black laminated cardstock and I attached the panel with the stencil on top of it. To spread the paste on top of the stencil, I used a palette knife. Then I squished the ink on top of the white board. Since the texture paste is white, I squished the ink few times so the colors are not too pale, and then I mixed it with the texture paste. The color for me was a little bit too pale. Plus it was more pink than red, so I added more ink and mixed it with the texture paste again. However, it was still a little bit on the pinkish side, so I decided to take out the aged mahogany ink and I mixed it with the texture paste I already had on the board. Also, you can use reinkers if you have them. This way you can create bolder colors, and I think you can also get a translucent embossing paste. That might be a good option to create darker and bolder colors. The rest of the ink colors are the same I used on the previous card. I wiped the red off the board. I just didn't have space for the other colors. Otherwise, I would apply the inks first and mix them with the texture paste, and then I would clean the whiteboard. I repeated the whole process. I squished the inks onto the board and mixed it with the texture paste, and then I applied it onto the cardstock. Once I was happy with the application, I removed the stencil. Keep in mind, texture paste dries quite quickly, so once you are done applying the colors, remove the stencil and wash it off, or you can just put it into a bowl of water. I do this quite often when I do not have the time to rush to the sink and clean it off. Either way, it's very important you clean the stencil and other tools so they will not get ruined. It took me about 7 or 8 minutes to apply all the texture paste, and I didn't have any trouble washing it off. So you do have some time before it dries. If you have parts where the texture paste is sticking off the panel, just use your palette knife to smooth those out. Again, the colors look very nice. If you want to give your project some texture, this is definitely a way to do it. Plus, the recipients of the card, unless they are card makers themselves, will be wondering how you made it. The last technique I have for you today is using the Nuvo Glimmer paste, which is similar to the texture paste, except it has glitter in it and is more watery. This is probably not the best word to describe it because it's not like a liquid, but it's definitely more sleeker. I bought it actually for my Christmas cards, but since it's red, which is also a color of autumn, I wanted to give it a try. Again, I attached the panel onto a laminated cardstock. This time I decided to use a red cardstock and I used my palette knife to spread the paste across the stencil, making sure I fill all the gaps. Also, a little side note, the glitter will stick to the stencil, and while I was able to wash most of it off, some was still sticking to it. Not a big deal, this is actually a second set of cards I made and the glitter didn't transfer, but I thought it's something to keep in mind. As I said, the glimmer paste is more wet than the texture paste, but once it's dry, it's okay. And the glitter really makes the paste sparkle. As always, it's difficult to show it on a camera, but in real life, it's sparkly, it shines, and it's really pretty. I let all the panels fully dry. I'm not really sure how long does it take because I usually do something else whilst it's drying. For the texture paste, I definitely know it dries very quickly. I would say you don't need more than 10 or 15 minutes. To finish up the cards, I started working on the sentiments. I started with the first panel where I only used the distress inks. This is very simple what I do here. I'm just stamping a thank you sentiment from the Brushed Greetings 2 stamp set from Clearly Besotted. It seems like this stamp set was discontinued because I could not find it anywhere. I really don't understand why. It's such a beautiful stamp set. I hope Clearly Besotted brings it back. I used my Mini Misty stamping tool because I was going to stamp twice to have a nice bold image. And the ink I used was the VersaFine ink in Onyx Black. For the other two panels, I die cut the word thanks. This is another older item I have from Clearly Besotted that is no longer available, but there are other brands who sell similar dies, maybe even better ones. And I would not recommend it anyway because it has a fault. If you see here where the NK join, that part doesn't cut. I just used a craft knife to cut it out, but this is an unnecessary step to do because I needed 8 die cuts altogether and it slowed me down. To adhere all the die cut pieces, I used a 2-way glue pen from Zig. You can also use a double-sided tape or something similar, but I really like to use this glue pen to adhere small die cuts like these on top of each other because it's simple to apply and also you have some wiggle room before it dries. I used 4 die cuts for each of the 2 cards, and I also put a scrap paper on my desk so I don't get any glue on my craft mat. After the die cuts were dry, I used the multimedia matte adhesive to adhere it onto the card bases, just because I know this glue is really good and is very strong, and because especially the glimmer paste is rather slick, I really wanted to make sure that the sentiment doesn't fall off. I used a foam tape to adhere all the panels on top of a card base. For the first 2 panels, I used a craft cardstock, and for the red panel, I used a white cardstock. I really like how the cards turned out. I just wish I also had the mousse from Nuvo in autumnal color, so I could show you that as well, but I will try to use it on one of my Christmas cards for this year. I hope you liked this video as well, and if you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can follow me on Instagram and Pinterest, and also hop over to my blog where I have photos of the cards and often I include more information as well. All the links you can find in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!